The foreclosure notice hit the dirt before Elias Kane finished reading it. Harlan Voss stood 3 feet away on the main street of Red Rock, 2 deputies flanking him. A smile carved into his face, like something that had never been alive to begin with. 30 days, Kane. Then every acre you own belongs to me. Elias's hand moved to his holster. One deputy raised his rifle. And that was the exact moment the 2:15 train rolled into Red Rock Station, and a woman in a dark brown dress stepped onto the platform carrying a leather satchel and eyes that missed nothing. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell so you never miss what happens next. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get back to Red Rock. The train station at Red Rock, Texas, smelled like coal smoke and dry August heat, and the particular kind of tension that settles over a small town when men are about to do something they cannot take back. Ada Merritt stood on the bottom step of the passenger car and did not move. She had ridden 14 hours from St. Louis with a satchel on her lap and a set of documents folded inside her boot that she had not told a single living soul about. She had composed herself through 2 transfers, a broken axle outside of Abilene that cost 4 hours, and a rainstorm somewhere in central Texas that flooded the tracks and made the last stretch of track feel like riding a boat in a bad sea. She had been calm through all of it. She was not calm now. 40 yards from where she stood, a man she had never met was being told by another man in a gray suit that he had 30 days to vacate land his family had worked for 20 years. Ada watched. Her hand tightened on the strap of her satchel. The man in the gray suit was doing most of the talking. Short, thick through the chest, with the kind of stillness that comes from a man who has won enough fights that he stopped needing to look like he was in one. He held a folded paper between 2 fingers and offered it forward the way you offer something to a dog you do not entirely trust. The man who took it was tall, lean, the kind of lean that comes from hard work rather than not enough food. Dark hair, dark eyes, jaw set so tight Ada could see the muscle jumping in his cheek from 40 yards away. He read the paper. His face did not change. Then, slowly, he lowered it to his side, and his free hand drifted toward the holster at his hip. The deputy on the left stepped forward and raised his rifle. "Don't," the man in the gray suit said softly. Not to the deputy, to the tall man. "Don't make this worse than it has to be, Kane. You signed the promissory note. I have the paper right here. Court has already reviewed it. I never signed the promissory note with you, Voss." The tall man's voice came out level, dangerously level, the way a river sounds quiet right before the drop. "Not 4 years ago, not any time. I have never borrowed money from your bank. I have never set foot inside your bank." "The court disagrees." Voss smoothed the front of his jacket. 30 days. Ada stepped off the train. She did not make a decision exactly. Her feet just moved. She had learned over the years that her feet sometimes knew things before her brain caught up, and this was one of those times. She crossed the platform, went down the station steps, and walked across the main street of Red Rock, Texas, toward a confrontation that was absolutely none of her business. The tall man, Kame, the gray-suited man had called him, noticed her coming when she was about 10 feet out. His eyes cut to her, then back to Voss. She saw the calculation behind them. Who is this? Does she matter? Can she wait? She stopped beside him anyway. "Elias Kane?" she said. A beat. "Yes." "Ada Merritt." She did not offer her hand, did not smile. Just stood beside him and looked at Harlan Voss the way she used to look at numbers in a ledger that did not add up, with the particular patience of a woman who already suspected where the error was hidden and was simply confirming it. I'll need a copy of that promissory note." Silence. Voss looked at her. His expression did not shift much, but something moved behind his eyes. The same movement Ada had seen in the eyes of the senior partner at Hartwell and Cross, right before he told her to clean out her desk. Recognition. Not of her specifically, of what she was. Someone who was going to be a problem. "And you are?" he said. "His wife," Ada said. Which was not quite true yet, and might never be entirely true, depending on how the next hour went. But it had the desired effect of establishing whose side she was standing on. Voss smiled. "His wife. Well, that changes precisely nothing about the legal situation, Mrs. Kane. The note exists. The debt exists. The land will transfer in 30 days if it is not settled." He tucked the paper back into his breast pocket. "Good day." He turned and walked back up the main street, his deputies falling in behind him, and the whole procession disappeared around the corner of the feed store without hurrying. Ada stood in the street and watched them go. Elias Kane stood beside her and said nothing for a long time. Then, "I didn't send for a lawyer." "No," Ada said. "You sent for a wife." "You got off the train and walked straight into that." "I could see what was happening from the platform." "You don't know what's happening." He finally looked at her, fully, the way he hadn't when Voss was still standing there. His eyes moved from her face to the satchel on her shoulder, to her boots, and back up. "You've been in this town for 2 minutes." "I've been reading documents like that one for 11 years, Ada said. "Promissory notes, deed transfers, mortgage instruments. I was a legal clerk for a firm in St. Louis before—" She stopped. "Before I wasn't. The note he showed you, was the ink dark or faded?" Elias stared at her. "What?" "The ink on the signature. Was it the same color as the rest of the document, or was it darker, fresher looking?" He was quiet. She could see him going back through it in his mind, the way he'd held that paper, the way he'd read it. "Darker," he said finally. "I thought maybe the light." "It wasn't the light." Ada adjusted the strap on her satchel. "Where's your wagon?" Elias Kane did not speak again for the entire 2-hour ride out to his ranch. Ada did not push him. She sat on the bench seat beside him with her satchel between her feet and watched the Texas landscape open up around them, brown and enormous and relentlessly flat until it hit the horizon and just kept going. The sky overhead was the particular shade of blue that felt like it was trying to say something important, but hadn't worked out how yet. The ranch came into view around a low rise. She did not say anything when she saw it. The house needed paint. The fence line on the east side had 3 posts down. The stable roof had been patched in at least 4 places with boards that didn't match the original. And the paddock behind the stable held 6 horses, not the 8 or 10 she would have expected for a working ranch of this size. What the ranch had, though, was good bones. She could see that. The house sat solid on its foundation. The well was positioned well, uphill from the stable. The soil near the creek line showed dark and rich. Someone had built this place to last. Elias climbed down from the wagon without a word, tied off the horse, and carried her bag inside. She followed. The kitchen table had 3 papers spread across it. She stopped when she saw them. "You've already been going through your records," she said. "Since 6 this morning." He set her bag down by the bedroom door. "Can't find any record of a transaction with Voss's bank. Not in my ledger, not in my father's ledger. Nothing." Ada walked to the table and looked at the papers without touching them. Loan records. A deed transfer from 1871, when his father had bought the second 100 acres. A tax receipt from 1880. She turned to him. "May I?" He crossed his was. What happened? She met his eyes. I found something in the firm's records that I wasn't supposed to find, and when I brought it to the attention of the senior partner, he decided that the cleanest solution was to remove the person who had found it. He fired you. He had me charged with falsifying records. Her voice did not change. Cleared eventually, but by then my name had been through enough mud that no firm in St. Louis would take me on. I had $5 and a letter of reference that nobody would read, and a copy of the documents I'd found, and no idea what to do with any of it. A beat. Elias looked at her. So you answered an advertisement, he said. I answered 14. You were the only one who wrote back. Something shifted in his face, not softening exactly, more like a door that had been shut a long time ago, being tested to see if it still opened. I wrote back because your letter didn't try to sell me anything, he said. Every other woman I heard from told me how beautiful she was, how accomplished. You said you could keep accounts, and you didn't need much. I don't. Ada looked at the papers on the table. May I? He pushed off the door frame and walked out the back door toward the stable. She took that as yes. Ada sat at the kitchen table and went through every document Elias Kane had in the house. Tax records going back to 1869. The original deed in his father's name. 2 loan agreements, both with the First Territorial Bank, not Voss's institution. Both marked paid in full. A letter from the county assessor from 1881 confirming clear title. She spread them out in order and read them twice. Then she sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling and thought. The promissory note Voss had produced bore Elias Kane's name and what appeared to be his signature. It claimed he had borrowed $4,000 in September of 1879, using the ranch as collateral, and had made no payments in 4 years. Under Texas law at the time, Voss had every right to foreclose. The problem, Voss's problem, if she was reading this right, was the paper. A document from September 1879 should show age. The ink should have oxidized to brown at the edges. The paper fibers should have yellowed, especially in the fold lines where moisture from the air worked in over time. The signature ink on the note Voss had shown Elias had been darker than the rest of the document. Ada had seen exactly this before, at Hartwell and Cross, the firm that had destroyed her. She had recognized what she was looking at because she had stumbled across the same technique in their records. Blank signature pages, signed years earlier by clients for legitimate purposes, repurposed into new documents when needed. The trick relied on the fact that most people, when presented with their own signature, believed it was genuine. The mind fills in the rest. She was still sitting at the table when Elias came back inside. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, took in the spread of documents. His jaw tightened. Find anything? Your title is clean, Ada said. Your loan history is clean. You have never done business with Harlan Voss's bank. She paused. The note he showed you is forged. Silence. I know that, Elias said. His voice came out flat, careful. I know I never signed it. Knowing it and proving it are 2 different things. Yes, Ada looked at him. That's correct. They are 2 very different things. So where does that leave me? In a better position than you were this morning, she said, because now someone with some knowledge of fraudulent instruments is sitting in your kitchen. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down hard, his elbows on the table, his face in his hands. She watched him. He was not crying. He was thinking, and it looked like it hurt. When he lifted his head, his eyes were red at the edges, but dry. I have 6 horses, he said. Used to have 11. Lost 3 to a sickness last spring that Doc Fleming said he'd never seen before. Lost 2 more to the same thing in June. 3 families depend on this ranch. My foreman Dill and his wife and their kids, the Rutherford brothers who work the south field. If I lose the land—" "You're not going to lose the land," Ada said. "You've been here 4 hours." "I know." She kept her voice level. "I'm not telling you everything is fine. I'm telling you the document is forged, and forged documents can be challenged. That is a fact. How we use it is a problem for tomorrow. Tonight—" She glanced toward the window, toward the paddock and the 6 horses beyond it. "Tonight, I want to look at your horses." Elias looked up. "Why?" "Because you said you lost 5 to a sickness nobody could diagnose. Because the ones you have left look—" She stopped herself. She had promised herself not to say too much too fast. This man had let her sit at his table and go through his records, and that was already more trust than most men in his position would have offered a woman they'd known for 4 hours. "Because I'd like to see them." He looked at her for a long moment. "My horses aren't in your advertisement," he said. "No," Ada agreed. "Neither is your land. But here we are." He stood up. "You hungry?" She was, in fact, nearly hollow with hunger after 14 hours on the train. But she said, "I can eat later." He moved to the stove. "Sit down," he said. "I'll heat beans. Then we'll look at the horses." They ate without much conversation. The beans were plain, seasoned with salt and nothing else, served with cornbread that was 2 days old and had gone a little dry. Ada ate everything on her plate. Elias watched her without making a show of watching her, the way people do when they are trying to take the measure of someone and don't want to be caught at it. She did not look away when she caught him at it. She just held his gaze until he looked back down at his food. The stable smelled wrong. Not dead wrong, not the way she'd feared when she saw the horses moving too slowly in the paddock, but wrong underneath the normal smell of hay and animal and leather and manure. Sweet in a way that healthy animals don't smell, like something working too hard inside them, burning through resources faster than they could replenish. She had smelled this before. Her mother had taken her into the mining camps outside of Harlan County, Kentucky, when she was 7 years old, carrying a basket of dried herbs and a woman's certainty that the company doctor was either incompetent or indifferent, and often both. The horses in the camp stables had smelled this way. The summer the water source upstream had been contaminated by runoff from a new claim being worked 1/2 mile up the mountain. Ada crouched beside the nearest horse, a roan gelding who stood with his head slightly lower than normal, ears half back. She placed her hand on his neck. "Don't," Elias said from behind her. Not angry. Careful. The way you say "don't" to someone who is about to step on something that bites. "He's been warm," Ada said. "Not burning, but warm." She lifted the horse's lip, checked his gums. Pale. She pressed her fingertip against the gum and watched the color return. Slow. Too slow. She rose and moved to the next stall. "His name is Cody," Elias said. "The roan." "How long has he been off his feed?" 10 days. "And the others?" "Judge went off his feed first, about 3 weeks ago. Then Cody, then Pearl." Ada went to each one. 3 horses standing, 3 more in the far stalls, lying down when she reached them. She knelt in the dirt beside each one, and spent time she knew Elias was watching and measuring, and she did not rush. When she stood the last time, her dress had dirt on both knees, and her hands smelled of horse. "You've had Doc Fleming out," she said. "Twice. He said—" Elias stopped. "He said there wasn't much to be done. Said he'd seen something similar in the spring, 2 years back, over at the Murphy Ranch. Said those horses didn't make it." "Did the Murphy horses drink from the same water source as yours?" Elias went still. She could see him working back through something. "Gantry Creek," he said slowly. "Both ranches pull from Gantry Creek. But I've been pulling from that creek for 20 years and never. Is there anything new upstream? In the last 6 months? Mining activity? A new claim being worked? Road construction?" The look on his face told her before his mouth did. "Railroad survey crew," he said. "Started working up near the Gantry headwaters in April. They've been running equipment up there." "There it is," Ada said quietly. "You think the railroad is poisoning my water. I think something upstream is contaminating the creek and your horses are drinking it. Whether it's the railroad directly or just the disruption of soil that's releasing mineral deposits that were stable before." She paused. "Either way, you need to stop letting them drink from Gantry Creek tonight. Tonight, not tomorrow. And replace the water with what?" "The well behind the house. I saw a hand pump at the north end of the paddock. Is that fed by the same source as the kitchen?" "Different aquifer," he said. "Deeper. Father sank it specifically because—" He stopped again. She was seeing him do this repeatedly, reach back into his father's decisions and find things that mattered now. Because he didn't trust the surface water after a dry summer. "Then that's where your horses drink from now." Ada moved toward the stable door. "I need to go back to the house. I need my bag." "For what?" She turned to face him. He stood in the center of the stable aisle, both hands loose at his sides, the lamplight behind him making it hard to read his face. "I have medicine with me," she said. "My mother was a healer. She learned from her mother, and I learned from her. I have dried willow bark and peppermint and a few other things that can help a feverish animal if they're prepared correctly." She held his gaze. "I am not Doc Fleming. I don't have a certificate on a wall. What I have is what my mother put in my hands for 30 years, and a fairly specific knowledge of what's making your horses sick and how to address it. I'd like to try." Elias Kane stood there in the lamplight, in the stable that smelled of sick horses and old hay, and looked at a woman he had known for less than a day, and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "You think the same people poisoning my horses are the same ones forging my signature on a banknote?" Ada felt something go quiet in her chest. The particular quiet of a door swinging open to a room she had already suspected was there. "I think Harlan Voss wants your land," she said. "I think he has wanted it for a while. And I think a man who wants land badly enough will use every tool available to him." She paused. "Sick horses are a reason to take out a loan. A loan means dealings with a bank. A bank means documentation. Documentation can be altered." She let that sit. "I am not saying I can prove any of that yet, but you think it." "I think it." He nodded once, turned toward the stable door, and held it open for her. "Get your bag," he said. "I'll start the fire." Ada walked out into the dark Texas night, with the stars burning overhead like they were trying to tell her something she had almost forgotten. That some things are worth showing up for. That some fights, when you walk into them, turn out to be your own. She did not look back, but she heard, from behind her, the sound of Elias Kane pulling water from the well for his horses. Not the creek, the well. He had listened. It was, she thought, a start. Ada worked through the first half of the night alone. She had not asked Elias to stay. He had stood in the stable doorway for a while, watching her unwrap jars from her satchel, and line them up along the top rail of the nearest stall. And then he had said he was going to check the fence line on the south side before the light was gone entirely. And she had nodded without looking up, and that had been that. She preferred it, if she was honest. She thought better without someone watching her hands. The willow bark went into the pot first, 2 good handfuls stripped from the bundle she had packed in St. Louis. The inner bark, pale and papery, smelling of something clean and medicinal. She had boiled water from the well, not the creek, never the creek again until they knew what was in it, and set the pot on the small camp stove she carried for exactly this kind of situation. Her mother had taught her that a healer who could not make medicine in a stable or a field or a stranger's kitchen was not much of a healer at all. She added peppermint when the willow bark had reduced by half. The smell that rose up was sharp and clear and cut through the heavy, sick sweetness that clung to the stable air like old smoke. "What is that?" She turned. Elias stood in the stable doorway. She had not heard him come back. He was looking at the pot, not at her, his expression somewhere between suspicious and something else she couldn't name yet. "Willow bark and peppermint," she said. "The willow bark reduces fever and eases the inflammation in their joints. The peppermint helps clear the airways. Their lungs are working harder than they should be." She went back to stirring. The contamination in the creek water, whatever's causing it, is likely a heavy mineral compound, sulfur or iron runoff from disturbed ground. Their bodies are fighting it. The fever is the fight, not the problem. I'm trying to help the fight along. A long pause. Doc Fleming gave them a tonic from his bag.
What kind of tonic? He didn't say. Did it help?
No. Ada said nothing. She strained the liquid through the cheesecloth she had folded into her bag, the dark amber medicine coming through slow and steaming into the ceramic pitcher she had found in the kitchen cupboard and brought out without asking. She had noted the look on Elias's face when he'd come in and seen his kitchen being reorganized for purposes he hadn't anticipated, and she had met that look steadily until it passed. "I'm going to start with Cody," she said. "He's weaker than the others, but he's still taking water. That means he can swallow. And if he can't, then we find another way." She picked up the pitcher and the ladle and walked to Cody's stall. The roan was lying down now, which he hadn't been an hour ago. She crouched beside him without hesitating. "I need you to hold his head." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not a veterinarian," Elias said.
"I know. I'm asking you to hold his head, not diagnose him." She looked up. "He knows you. He'll be calmer if you're the one doing it."
Something moved through Elias's face. He crossed the stall without another word and knelt in the straw beside Cody, his big hands sliding under the horse's jaw, lifting gently. Cody's ear turned toward his voice when Elias said the horse's name, low and quiet, the way you talk to something you're afraid might leave. Ada poured the first dose, small, careful, tilting the ladle so the medicine ran into the corner of the horse's mouth rather than straight down. She watched his throat, waited. He swallowed. "Good boy," Elias said, so quietly Ada almost didn't hear it, like the words weren't meant for her at all. She poured again. They worked in silence through the first round, moving from stall to stall, Elias holding each horse's head with a steadiness that told her this was not a man who was ever careless with the things in his care. He had lost 5 horses. She could see what that had cost him in the way he handled the ones that remained, deliberate and tender, in a way that people who had not lost things yet don't know how to be. It was past midnight when they finished the first pass. Ada rinsed the pitcher, brewed a second batch, started again. "How long?" Elias asked. He was leaning against the post in the aisle, arms crossed, watching her work over the camp stove. "To see improvement? If I'm right about the source, and if we've stopped the exposure, 2 days, maybe 3. She looked up. "The fever should break first, then the appetite comes back. Then they want to stand." "And if you're wrong about the source?" "Then we haven't made anything worse." She held his gaze. I don't promise what I can't deliver, Mr. Kane. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Elias, she turned back to the pot. Elias. The name sat differently in the stable air than his surname had.
She noted that and filed it and kept stirring.
You said you had documents, Elias said, when you were in St. Louis, the ones you found at the firm, the reason they came after you. Ada's hands did not stop moving. Yes. You brought them with you? Yes. Why? She took her time answering. The fire crackled under the pot. Somewhere outside, one of the horses in the paddock shifted and stamped, the sound carrying clear in the night air. Because I didn't know what I was walking into when I answered your advertisement, she said finally. I knew the land out here was changing hands fast. I knew the railroads were moving west, and money was following them. And where money moves fast, documentation gets loose. I brought the documents because I have learned, twice now, that being the only person who knows something and having no proof of it is the same as knowing nothing. What did you find? He said, at Hartwell and Cross. A pattern. She strained the second batch of medicine. Clients would sign documents early in a relationship, standard practice. Power of attorney forms, blank authorization pages. The firm would hold those signatures. Years later, when land values shifted or a client died and heirs weren't watching closely, the partners would use those old signatures on new documents, transfer deeds, loan instruments. She paused. It was elegant, in a horrible way. The ink on the signature was always genuine, because the signature was genuine. The client had really signed, just not that particular document. Elias was very still. That's what Voss showed me today. That's what I believe Voss showed you today. She brought the pitcher to Cody's stall and went back to work. Did you ever sign anything with his bank? Even something small? A deposit receipt? A letter of acknowledgement? Anything at all? Never. Think carefully. I have thought carefully every day for 3 weeks since the first notice showed up. His voice went flat. I don't do business with Harlan Voss. My father didn't do business with Harlan Voss. When I first came to Red Rock, Voss offered to extend credit on the stable expansion I was planning. I turned him down. I had the money saved. He didn't like that. Why? Because a man who doesn't owe Harlan Voss anything is a man Harlan Voss can't control. He looked at her. There are maybe 4 or 5 ranches in this county that don't carry his paper. He's worked through most of them in the last 10 years, one way or another. How many of them fought back? A pause. Something crossed his face that was older than anger. The Delacroix family, 3 years ago. Old man Delacroix had his own lawyer come out from San Antonio. Voss's people said the lawyer's horse threw him on the road out of town. Broke his arm in 2 places. His jaw was set tight. Delacroix signed over the land 2 weeks later. Ada kept her hand steady on the ladle. What about the county court? Judge Paris has held that bench for 15 years. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. All right, Ada said. All right. He said it back at her, and it came out almost sharp. That's what you say. All right. As if... He stopped, pressed his mouth together, started again. I have 48 days of operating money left. After that, I can't make payroll for Dill and the Rutherford brothers. If the horses don't recover, I lose the haulage contracts. If I lose the contracts, I lose the operating money faster. And somewhere inside all of that, Voss has a forged document and a bought judge, and I am standing here in my own stable in the middle of the night, watching a woman I met 6 hours ago pour tree bark tea into my horses, and I... He stopped. The silence was not empty. It was the silence of a man who had just said more than he meant to. Ada did not look up from Cody. She said, I know. You don't. I know what it's like to have the thing you built being taken apart, piece by piece, by someone who has more power than you and is willing to use every bit of it. She kept her voice even. I know what it's like to be right about something and have no one believe you. I know what it's like to show up somewhere new with nothing but a bag and a set of skills that haven't been tested in this particular place yet. She paused. I'm not asking you to trust me because I arrived on the right train. I'm asking you to let me work because I know how to work. And right now, working is the only thing either of us can do. Elias said nothing. She moved to the next stall. After a moment, he followed. By 2 a.m, they had made 3 full rounds of every horse in the stable. Elias had stopped asking questions somewhere around the 2nd round and started simply moving when and where Ada needed him to move. A rhythm that felt less like 2 strangers in a stable and more like 2 people who had been doing this long enough to stop narrating it. Ada noted this and did not comment on it. At 2:30, a sound from outside the stable stopped them both. Not a horse sound, something else. The scrape of a boot on dry ground. Elias's hand went to his holster before Ada had even fully processed what she had heard. He held up his other hand, flat, and she went still. He moved to the stable door and looked out. She watched his shoulders. They did not drop. "Who's there?" he said. Not a question, a statement with a sharp edge. A voice came back, older, female, dry as the August grass. "It's Nora Bright, you fool. Put the gun away." Elias exhaled. He did not put the gun away, but he angled it toward the ground and stepped back to let the door swing wider. The woman who came through was small and angular, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had turned into something more interesting with age. She wore a gray dress and a wool shawl despite the heat, and she carried a lantern of her own that threw a second circle of light across the stable floor. Her eyes went immediately to Ada. "You're the one from the train," she said, not accusing, assessing. "Ada Merritt," Ada said. "Nora Bright. I was your neighbor before Voss took my land." She looked at Elias. "I saw the light in the stable, and I saw the lamp moving around the paddock earlier. Figured something was wrong with the horses again. Thought you might want to know that Voss had 2 men riding your fence line tonight." Elias went very still. "Riding it or cutting it?" "Riding it." Nora set her lantern on the rail. "Looking at it is my guess, seeing what's worth keeping when it's his." Her mouth pulled thin. "He's done this before. He rode my fence line 2 weeks before the court date, measuring." "Why are you telling me this tonight?" Elias asked. Nora looked at him with the patience of a woman who had run out of gentle ways to say difficult things. "Because Voss has been wanting your land since your daddy was alive, Elias Kane. And you keep acting like if you keep your head down and do the right thing and pay your taxes and keep your fences up, the law is going to protect you." She turned to Ada. "You the one working on his horses?" "Yes." "Know anything about forged deeds?" Ada felt something click into place. "I know quite a bit about them." Nora reached into the front of her shawl and pulled out a folded paper. It was worn along the creases, handled many times, the way something is handled when you are trying to decide whether it is the thing you think it is. She held it out to Ada. "That's the deed transfer Voss used to take my land," she said. "I got a copy from the court record office. The clerk owed me a favor, and I used it." Her eyes were steady. "My husband never signed that paper. He died in March of 1878. That paper is dated November of 1878. Ada unfolded it carefully. She brought it under the lamplight. She looked at it the way she had looked at thousands of documents in 11 years, not reading the words first, reading the physical object. The paper, the ink, the pressure of the pen in the signature line. "May I keep this?" she said. "That's why I brought it." Nora pulled her shawl tighter. "I have been waiting 3 years for someone to walk into this county who knew what they were looking at." She looked at Ada with something that was not quite hope yet, but was the thing that comes just before it. "You know what you're looking at." "I think I do," Ada said. "I need to compare it to the note Voss showed today. I need to see them side by side." "How are you going to get a copy of that note?" "By requesting it through the court as an interested party," Ada said. "Elias has the right to see the instrument being used against him. The court is obligated to provide a copy." She looked at Elias. "Is there anyone in this town besides the judge who handles court records?" "The clerk, Martin Peel." He paused. "Peel is Paris's wife's cousin." "Of course he is." Ada folded Nora's document and held it carefully. "Then we go over the county court. San Antonio has a federal land office with its own records independent of the county system." She looked at both of them. Voss can control a county judge. He cannot as easily control a federal recorder. Nora made a sound that might have been a laugh in a different circumstance. "You've been here 1 day." "I know." Ada looked back down at the pitcher of medicine, still half full. "I still have 3 horses to finish." Nora stayed. She did not offer to help, and Ada did not ask her to. She sat on a hay bale near the stable door and watched in the way of someone who has seen enough of life to know the difference between a woman doing something brave and a woman doing something competent, and who understood that the second was considerably more useful than the first. Elias moved through the last 3 stalls without being directed. His hands were steady on each horse's head. He talked to them in a low voice Ada was not trying to hear, and she did not try. It was close to 4 in the morning when Ada emptied the last of the pitcher and stood up and pressed both hands against the small of her back. "That's all I can do tonight," she said. "Will it be enough?" Elias asked. She looked at the 6 horses, at the slow, steady rise and fall of their ribs, at Cody, who had shifted his weight slightly in the last hour, moving from his side to his chest. The first change in position she had seen since arriving. "Ask me in the morning," she said. Nora rose from the hay bale and picked up her lantern. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said, not asking, informing. She looked at Ada one more time, that same measuring look, but something had changed in it. "My husband spent 40 years building our land," she said. "I watched it get signed away in a courtroom in 20 minutes. She paused. "Don't let that happen here." Then she walked out of the stable into the dark, her lantern moving away across the yard until it disappeared over the rise, toward wherever she had come from. Ada and Elias stood alone in the stable. The horses breathed around them, slow and measured. The camp stove had gone cold. The smell of peppermint still hung in the air, clean and sharp against the sick sweetness underneath. "You should sleep," Elias said. "So should you." A long beat. "I don't sleep much." "Neither do I." Ada picked up her satchel. "But I think better when I'm not running on nothing." She moved toward the stable door, then stopped. "The document's in my boot," she said, without turning around. "The ones I brought from St. Louis. They document the same pattern Voss is using. Different firm, different state, different names, but the same method." She paused. "If we can show a court of record that this technique has been used systematically, that it is an established fraud with a documented history, that changes the burden of proof. It moves from Elias Kane failed to disprove the note to Harlan Voss must prove the note is genuine." Silence behind her. Then Elias Kane said very quietly, You came here with that. I came here with what I had, Ada said. I didn't know what I was walking into. I don't think any of this is coincidence. She finally turned. He was standing in the center of the stable aisle, and the lamplight caught his face. And for a moment, he looked exactly like what he was. A man who had been holding everything up alone for a very long time, and had just felt someone put a hand on the other side of the weight. Get some sleep, Elias. She walked across the dark yard to the house. Behind her, she heard him stay. Cody stood up on the morning of the second day. Ada heard it before she saw it. The shift of weight in the stall, the scrape of hooves finding purchase on the stable floor, and then the sound that was different from everything she had heard in that stable since arriving. Not the weak shuffle of a sick animal repositioning. Something deliberate, something with intention behind it. She set down the pot she was carrying and walked to his stall. The roan gelding stood on all four legs, head still low, knees trembling with the effort of it. But standing. His ears moved toward her when she stepped closer, slow but tracking, the way healthy horses track sound. Ada put her hand on his neck. Warm, not burning. She stood there with her hand on that horse for a long moment, and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the horse's pulse under her fingers wasn't already saying better. Elias was at the well when she came out of the stable. He had been up before her. She had heard him moving through the kitchen while it was still dark, had heard the back door, had stayed in bed another 20 minutes anyway because she had learned that some men need to have the morning to themselves before they can be around anyone. He turned when he heard her boots on the ground. She said, "Cody's standing." He put down the bucket. She watched him walk to the stable, watched him go into Cody's stall and put both hands on that horse's face, the way you hold something you were afraid you'd lost. He did not make a sound. She did not need to see his face to know what was on it. She went back to the kitchen and started the coffee. He came in 10 minutes later. She had 2 cups on the table. He sat down and wrapped both hands around his, and did not drink it for a while, just held it. And she understood that he was doing what people do after the worst of something passes. Sitting still for a moment to make sure it was real. "Judge, too," she said. "The bay in the 3rd stall. He put weight on his feet when I checked him an hour ago. Not standing yet, but close." Elias nodded, took a slow breath. "Pearl?" "Pearl is still down, but her fever dropped overnight. I could feel it." Ada picked up her own cup. "She's fighting." "She's always been a fighter." He said it like he was talking about someone he'd known a long time, which she supposed he had. They drank their coffee. Outside, Dill Watkins, Elias's foreman, a wide, quiet man with a permanent squint from 30 years of Texas sun, moved through the paddock doing the morning feed, which had become a more careful operation now that the horses were drinking from the well instead of the creek. Ada had explained the situation to him the morning before. He had listened without interrupting, asked 2 questions, practical ones, about quantities and timing, and then gone to work as if taking instruction from a woman he'd never met was the most ordinary thing in the world. Ada had appreciated that more than she'd said. "I need to go to town today," Ada said. Elias looked up. "I need to get to the telegraph office before Voss's people are watching it." She set down her cup. "There's a federal land recorder in San Antonio named Aldous Greer. I met him once, 3 years ago, at a property law conference in Kansas City. He came to a lecture I gave on documentary fraud in deed transfers." She paused. "He gave me his card and told me if I ever found something worth looking at, to send word." Elias was quiet for a moment. "You gave a lecture." "The firm thought it would bring in clients." Her voice stayed flat. "It did. That turned out to..." That I have found something worth looking at. She looked at Elias directly. I'm also going to the county records office. I want to see how many deed transfers Boss has filed in this county in the last 5 years. The pattern matters. 1 forged document is a crime. 10 forged documents using the same technique is a federal case. Peel won't show you those records. He doesn't have a choice, Ada said. County deed records are public documents. He can make it slow and unpleasant, but he cannot legally deny access. She paused. He will try to make it slow and unpleasant. Elias looked at her. I'll come with you. No. She said it cleanly, without softening it.
If you come with me, it becomes a confrontation between you and Voss's people, before we have anything solid. I need to be a woman asking a clerk for public records. Boring, administrative, not worth reporting back to Voss. And if it is worth reporting back to Voss, then we move faster than I planned. She rose from the table. I'll take the mare you have in the north paddock, the gray one. She looked healthy enough yesterday. Rosie, he stood. She's fine. She's been on well water since before the others got sick. She stays separate. He followed Ada to the door. You know how to handle a horse alone on that road? Ada looked at him over her shoulder. I grew up in Kentucky, she said. I was riding before I was reading. He didn't argue, but she noticed he watched from the porch until she cleared the first rise. The county records office sat in the back of the courthouse building, behind a door with a frosted glass panel and the word clerk stenciled in black letters that had started to peel at the edges. Martin Peel was a thin man with the posture of someone who had spent decades bending over a desk and had given up fighting the permanent curve it had put in his spine. He looked up when Ada came in, and the look on his face when he took in what she was, a woman, alone, with a satchel and a set expression, told her everything she needed to know about how this was going to go. Help you? He said. The 2 words carried the specific inflection of a man who hoped the answer was no. Ada Merritt. She placed her hands flat on the counter. I'd like to review the deed transfer records filed in this county from January 1879 through present. Public records. Peel's eyes went to the door behind her, then back. Those records are archived. Takes time to pull. I have time. Could be several days. Then I'll come back in several days. She held his gaze. The request stands. I'd like it documented that I made it today, with today's date, if you have a request log. Something shifted in Peel's face. Not quite fear. The thing that lives next to fear in people who are used to small power over small things, and have just felt that power get smaller. He pulled a ledger from under the counter and wrote her name and the date without looking at her. I'll send word to the ranch when they're ready, he said. I'll be back day after tomorrow, Ada said, with or without word. She left before he could respond. The telegraph office was 3 doors down, run by a boy of about 19 named Curtis, who had the focused competence of someone who had found his particular skill early and was grateful for it. He took Ada's message, read it back to confirm the wording, and accepted her coins without any of Peel's studied indifference. The message she sent to Aldous Greer in San Antonio was 11 words. Found systematic deed fraud, multiple victims, physical documentation. Please advise jurisdiction. She had debated the wording for an hour the night before, lying awake in the bedroom she hadn't quite started thinking of as hers. 11 words that were true, that were urgent, and that gave nothing away to anyone who might read them between here and San Antonio. She was back outside when the voice came from her left. Mrs. Kane. She turned. Harlan Voss stood on the boardwalk outside the land office next door, hands in his jacket pockets,
That same carved smile. He had not been there when she walked past 2 minutes earlier, which meant he had come out when he saw her, which meant someone had told him she was in town. Ada calculated. Peel had a boy who ran errands. The boy could cover 3 doors in under 2 minutes if he was motivated. "Mr. Voss," she said. "Getting settled in, I hope?" He stepped down off the boardwalk and closed the distance between them by half. Not threatening exactly, measuring. "Red Rock's a small town. We take care of our own." "That's kind," Ada said. "Your husband is a proud man." He tilted his head slightly. "Proud men sometimes make situations harder than they need to be. The note is valid. The court has reviewed it. There are ways this can go that are better for everyone, including the people who work that ranch and their families." He let that sit. "I'm a reasonable man. I'm always open to a conversation." Ada looked at him the way she had looked at the forged deed the night before. Not at the words, at the thing beneath them. "I appreciate that," she said. "I'll let Elias know." "You do that." He held her gaze 1 beat longer than a man making casual conversation needs to. "Enjoy your time in town, Mrs. Kane." He walked back up onto the boardwalk and went inside without looking back. Ada stood in the street and felt the threat settle over her like a second skin, familiar and cold. The exact same temperature it had been in the senior partner's office at Hartwell and Cross, the day he told her to clean out her desk. She had been shaking then. She had hidden it well, but she had been shaking. She was not shaking now. She untied Rosie from the post and rode back toward the ranch. Nora was already at the kitchen table when Ada got back. She had apparently let herself in, which, from Elias's expression when Ada came through the door, seemed to be an established habit he had stopped trying to address. "Peel will have sent word to Voss within 10 minutes of you leaving," Nora said before Ada had taken her coat off. "He already knew," Ada said. "Voss was outside the land office when I came out of the telegraph office." She set her satchel on the table. "He was friendly. That means he's not worried yet. He's just reminding me that he knows I'm moving. He'll start worrying when the records request goes through," Nora said. "That's the idea." Ada opened her satchel and pulled out the papers she had brought from St. Louis. She had retrieved them from her boot before leaving that morning and moved them to the satchel's inner pocket, where they sat now slightly warm from being carried close to her body for 3 hours. She spread them on the table beside Nora's deed document. "I need to show you both something." Elias came in from the back door. He looked at the papers on the table and then at Ada and did not speak, just sat down and waited. "In St. Louis," Ada began, "the firm I worked for used a specific method. A client would sign a legitimate document early in the relationship. The firm would retain the original signature page. When they needed to create a fraudulent instrument later, they would attach that genuine signature to a new document. To anyone examining the signature alone, it looked real, because it was real. The forgery was in the assembly, not the signing." She set Nora's deed document at the top of the table. Then she set one of the St. Louis documents beside it. "Look at the baseline of the signature on each, the way the pen sits on the paper at the start of the first letter." Nora leaned in. Elias leaned in. "They're the same," Elias said slowly. "Not the same person's signature," Ada said. "The same technique applied to both. The pressure pattern, the slight angle where the signature page meets the body of the document, the margin between the last line of text and the signature line. All of these are consistent with a page that was signed separately and attached." She pointed. "Here and here." The body of the document was written on paper from one source. The signature page was written on paper from a different source, close enough that you wouldn't notice at a glance, but the grain is different. Nora sat back. Her hands were flat on the table,
and her face had gone through something that Ada was not going to look at directly, because it belonged to the woman alone. 3 years, Nora said. I've been looking at that paper for 3 years, and I couldn't name what was wrong with it. You knew something was wrong with it, Ada said. That's why you kept it. Nora said nothing, but her chin came up. If Greer responds from San Antonio, Ada continued, and if the Federal Land Office agrees to open a review, we can subpoena Voss's original documents. The assembled instruments can be physically examined. Paper composition, ink dating, binding method. She looked at Elias. That is how we prove the note is forged. Not by asserting it in a county court in front of a bought judge, but by demonstrating it through federal evidentiary review. Elias had been very quiet through this. Ada watched him. He was not a man who showed his thinking on his face, but she had started to learn the smaller signals. The way his jaw moved when he was working something through. The specific stillness that meant he was coming to a conclusion. How long does a federal review take? He said. Months, Ada said, if it goes through normal channels. I have 30 days on the foreclosure notice. I know. 30 days is not months. I know that too. Ada gathered the papers carefully. Which is why the federal review is not our only path. It is our strongest path. But there is also an injunction. She looked at him. If we can get an injunction filed in a court outside of Judge Paris's jurisdiction, a neighboring county, or directly at the state level in Austin, to halt the foreclosure proceedings pending review of the underlying instrument, that buys time. The injunction does not require us to prove the fraud. It only requires us to demonstrate that there is a legitimate question of fact about the validity of the note. Can you file an injunction? Nora asked. I am not licensed to practice law, Ada said. We need a lawyer. She paused. Not from San Antonio, since Voss apparently has long enough arms to reach a lawyer on a road between here and there. Elias looked at her. What are you thinking? There is a woman in Austin, Ada said. Clara Marsh. She is one of the only licensed female attorneys in Texas. I have corresponded with her. She handles property cases. She paused. She will not be cheap. Elias stood abruptly, walked to the window, stood there with his back to both of them for a long moment. 48 days of operating money, he said, as if he was reminding himself of the arithmetic he already knew. If I cash out the supply reserve, Elias? Ada kept her voice quiet. Before you do that, I need to tell you something. He turned. One of the documents I brought from St. Louis, she said. It doesn't just show the method Voss is using. It shows a business relationship. She picked up the last paper in the stack, the one she had kept at the bottom, the one she had read 17 times on the train and had not been entirely sure what to do with until she sat in this kitchen and listened to a man named Harland Voss and heard the specific weight the name carried. Hartwell and Cross, the firm that destroyed me. One of their out-of-state clients, listed in the records I copied, was a land acquisition company, registered in Missouri. The principal officer listed. She set the paper on the table and put her finger on the name. Is Harland Voss. The kitchen went absolutely still. Nora's breath came out slow, like something had been sitting on her chest and had just shifted. Elias looked at the paper, then at Ada. He's connected to the firm that trained you. The firm that trained me, and then tried to ruin me when I found out what they were doing. Ada's voice stayed steady. He is not their only client in Texas. He may not even be their largest. But he is documented. His name is in records that are currently sitting in my bag. Copies made in my own hand, verified against the originals before I left. She looked at him. This is what Hartwell and Cross didn't know I had. This is why they couldn't just fire me quietly. They had to ruin me, because if I surfaced somewhere with these papers and someone listened,
the whole apparatus starts to come apart. "Why didn't you go to someone sooner?" Nora asked. Ada met the older woman's eyes. "Who?" she said simply. "Who was I supposed to go to, Mrs. Bright? A lawyer? The ones in St. Louis were colleagues of the firm, or afraid of them. The police? Fraud law enforcement at the county level is entirely subject to local politics.
The newspapers? Something passed through her voice, controlled and flat. A woman with no current employment making accusations against one of the most established law firms in Missouri? Who reads that story and thinks she's the credible one? Nora held her gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, the way women of a certain age nod when they have understood something without needing it explained further. Elias pushed off from the table. He walked back to the window, and this time, when he stood there, the quality of his stillness was different. Not the stillness of a man bracing against something. The stillness of a man who has just found solid ground under feet that have been uncertain for a long time. "Write to Clara Marsh," he said. "Tonight." "I'll have it ready by morning," Ada said. "And Greer in San Antonio. The telegraph is already sent." He turned from the window. There was something in his face Ada had not seen there before. Not hope exactly, because hope in a man like Elias Kane would be too available, too undefended. Something more guarded than hope, but moving in the same direction. "You came here with all of this," he said. "The documents, the knowledge, the contacts." "I came here with what I had," Ada said, for the second time. "Why this ranch?" Elias asked. "Out of 14 advertisements." Ada looked at him. She thought about the letter she had received, reread 6 times on the train east from St. Louis, with her bag of medicines in her lap, and her mother's voice in the back of her mind saying, "The land always tells you what it needs, if you know how to listen." "Because your letter said you were a man who kept his word and worked his own ground," she said. "In my experience, that is not as common as it should be." Nora stood and picked up her shawl. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said. She looked at Ada on her way to the door. "Clara Marsh is a good woman. Tell her Nora Bright sent her name." She went out. Ada and Elias were left in the kitchen, in the particular quiet of 2 people who have been through something together and are still sorting out what that means. From outside, carried on the late afternoon air, came a sound that stopped them both. A whinny. Strong, clear, carrying the full round note of a healthy animal with air enough to spare. They both knew that voice. Ada was out the back door first, Elias a step behind her, and they crossed the yard and went through the stable door and stopped. Pearl stood in her stall, all 4 feet on the ground, head up, ears forward, looking at them with dark liquid eyes that held nothing of the glassy blankness of the past 3 days. Her coat was dark with the sweat of the effort it had taken to get upright. Her legs shook, but she was standing. She whinnied again when she saw Elias, and it came out annoyed, the way a healthy horse sounds when it has been waiting and no one has noticed. Elias made a sound low in his throat and went to her. He put his forehead against Pearl's and stood there, and Ada turned away and looked at the other stalls because this was not something that needed a witness. She counted horses. Cody standing, Judge standing, Pearl standing. The 3 in the far stall still down, but breathing differently than yesterday, slower and deeper, the shallow, rapid fight breathing giving way to something longer, something that had settled in for the work of healing rather than the work of surviving. She counted again because it mattered, because 3 days ago she had walked into the stable and counted 6 sick horses, and made a set of promises to herself that she had not made out loud to anyone. 6 horses, and all 6 of them breathing. She let out a breath she had been holding, it felt like, since she stepped off the train.
The letter to Clara Marsh went out on the morning stage the next day, tucked inside an envelope with Ada's name and the ranch address, written in the careful hand she had developed over 11 years of legal documentation. Clear, unambiguous, the kind of writing that does not invite misreading. Elias had watched her write it at the kitchen table the night before, sitting across from her with his coffee gone cold, reading each paragraph as she finished it, without asking permission and without comment, until she reached the last page. "You're asking her to file an emergency injunction," he said. "Based on documented evidence of systematic fraud," Ada said, without looking up. "Yes. She's in Austin. That's 3 days by stage. 2 if she rides." Ada folded the letter. "Clara Marsh rides." He had looked at her then with the expression she was coming to recognize. The one that was not quite surprise and not quite admiration, but was somewhere in the territory between them. The look of a man who keeps expecting to find the edge of what a person can do and keeps not finding it. The response came faster than Ada had planned for. Not from Clara Marsh, from San Antonio. Aldous Greer's reply arrived at the Red Rock Telegraph office on the 4th morning, and Curtis, the telegraph boy, wrote it out to the ranch himself because, he said, the man who had sent it had included an additional wire to the station, specifying that the reply was to be delivered directly to the recipient and to no one else. Ada read it twice, standing in the yard, then handed it to Elias. Greer's message was 14 words. Received. Recognized pattern. Federal Review authorized. Do not move documents. Expect contact within week. Elias read it. Read it again. He recognized the pattern, he said. "Which means Voss is not the only name in a federal recorder's file," Ada said. "Which means Greer has been watching this and waiting for someone to hand him what he needed to move." She took the paper back and folded it into her apron pocket. "It also means we have 7 days before federal contact, which is 7 days during which Voss cannot know this is coming." "How long before he finds out?" "The telegraph office is the telegraph office," Ada said. "Curtis is a good boy, but Voss has money, and money talks louder than loyalty in a town this size." She looked at Elias steadily. "We have to assume he finds out. The question is whether we're far enough along by then that it doesn't matter." Elias was quiet for a moment. "And if he moves on the foreclosure before the federal contact?" "Then we need Clara Marsh here first." Ada turned back toward the house. "I need to check on Pearl." Pearl was eating. Not much. A few pulls of hay from the rack, stopping to rest between each one, as if the effort was still significant. But eating. Her water bucket had gone down by half since the morning, and when Ada ran her hand along the mare's neck, the heat that had lived there for days had dropped to something that felt almost ordinary. She was standing in Pearl's stall when she heard the horses in the paddock react. That collective shift of attention that a group of animals makes when something outside their normal world has entered it. She came out of the stable and saw the rider coming up the main road from town. Not Voss, not his deputies. A woman, riding hard and straight, with the efficiency of someone who has no patience for the scenic route. She pulled up at the fence and dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. Clara Marsh was 40 years old, broad-shouldered, with gray threading through dark hair she kept pinned severely back from a face that had the particular weathered quality of a woman who had spent decades being the only one of what she was in every room she entered. She carried a leather document case strapped across her back, and she shook Ada's hand the way men shake hands, full grip, no hesitation. "Got your letter yesterday evening," she said. "Rode through the night." She looked at Elias. "You're Kane." "Yes, ma'am," Elias said. "Don't ma'am me. I'm younger than I look." She unstrapped the document case. "Where's your kitchen?" They sat at the table that had become, over the past 4 days, something like a war room. Ada's papers on one side, Elias's ranch documents on the other, Nora's deed transfer in the middle, where it had stayed since the night she brought it. Clara spread her own papers across the remaining space and read for 10 minutes without speaking. Nobody spoke. Even Nora, who had arrived an hour before Clara and was sitting in the corner with her shawl and a particular quality of watching everything, stayed quiet. Finally, Clara looked up. "The connection to Hartwell and Cross is the piece," she said to Ada. "You understand that. Everything else is local fraud, which is bad, but defensible with time. The Hartwell and Cross connection makes it interstate. That's federal jurisdiction, and federal jurisdiction is the only thing that gets you out from under Paris." "I know," Ada said. "You have the original documents? The St. Louis copies?" Ada opened her satchel and laid them out. Clara examined each one. Her hands were careful, but not slow. The hands of someone who had learned to be thorough without being precious about it. When she reached the document with Boss's name on it, she set it apart from the others and placed her finger on the signature line, the way Ada had done 4 days ago in this same kitchen. "This is his name on a Hartwell and Cross client register," Clara said. "Business relationship documented across a 4-year period," Ada said. "Wire transfers, correspondence references, a property acquisition listed in the Missouri County records that matches land Voss subsequently registered in Texas under a separate entity name." Clara sat back. Something moved through her face, the professional equivalent of a held breath. "You built this in St. Louis before you left." "I built what I could before they realized what I had." Ada's voice stayed even. "I didn't have time for everything. What I have is enough to establish the connection. A full discovery process would find the rest." "If we get to discovery," Clara said. "If we get to discovery," Ada agreed. Elias had been listening without moving. Now he leaned forward. "What does it take to get an injunction filed today?" Clara looked at him. "I file in the appellate district court in Bexar County, which is outside Paris's jurisdiction. I cite documented evidence of fraud and federal review in progress. The court can issue a temporary injunction halting all foreclosure proceedings pending review of the underlying instrument." She paused. "They don't have to believe the note is forged. They only have to agree that there is a legitimate legal question about its validity. Given what Ada has documented, that bar is met." She looked at the papers again. "I can have the filing prepared by tonight." "Tonight," Elias said. "I rode through the night," Clara said. "I don't do that for cases I intend to work slowly." Something crossed Elias's face. Not the guarded, almost hope Ada had been watching build over the past 4 days. Something fuller than that. He pressed both hands flat on the table, the way he had the very first morning when Ada had first mentioned the forged note, and he had anchored himself to the wood to keep from reacting before he was ready. This time, the gesture meant something different. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Your testimony about the foreclosure notice and Voss's conduct. In writing, today, witnessed." Clara looked at Nora. "And yours. Your deed transfer is the second documented case. 2 victims with the same fraudulent methodology is a pattern. A pattern is a federal case." Nora straightened in her corner. "I've been waiting 3 years to say what I know," she said. "Then let's not waste any more of your time," Clara said. They worked through the afternoon. Ada prepared the statement documents while Clara dictated the structure. Elias wrote his own testimony out in the careful, deliberate print of a man who had not been formally educated past the age of 14, but had spent 20 years keeping meticulous ranch records. And the precision of it, the specific dates and figures, and the absence of any exaggeration, was more convincing than eloquence would have been. Nora's testimony ran 6 pages. She wrote it herself, without prompting, in a hand that slanted hard to the right and pressed deep into the paper. And when she set down the pen, her face held the expression of a woman who had been carrying something for 3 years and had just put it on a table where other people could see it. Dill knocked on the kitchen door at 4 in the afternoon, which he did not do unless something warranted it. Ada opened it. "Ryder came up from the South Road," he said. Turned around when he saw the extra horses at the fence. He looked at Ada steadily. "Wasn't nobody I recognized." Ada stepped outside. Elias was beside her before she cleared the porch. "Voss knows someone is here," Ada said. Elias's jaw tightened. "He'll move up his timeline." "That's what I would do in his position." Ada turned back to the house. "Clara, how fast can you ride to Bexar County?" Clara appeared in the doorway. She had heard. "If I leave within the hour, I can file tomorrow morning when the court opens." "Take Dill with you," Elias said. "He knows the road south." "I don't need—" "He knows where the road narrows between here and the county line," Elias said. His voice had gone flat in a way Ada recognized. Not anger, something colder and more deliberate than anger. "And there are 2 places on that stretch where a horse can be spooked off the road by someone who knows the terrain." He held Clara's gaze. "Take Dill." Clara looked at him for a moment, then nodded once. "An hour," she said. She went back inside. Ada stayed on the porch. Elias stood beside her, and she could feel the tension in him the way you feel a change in weather. Not visible yet, but present, working toward something. "He's going to come at us directly now," Elias said. "He knows I have a lawyer. He knows I have documentation. The foreclosure process through the county court was clean and slow and easy. He didn't need to be visible. This changes it." "Yes," Ada said. "When Voss gets visible," Elias said, "people around him get hurt." Ada turned to look at him. "Are you telling me to leave?" He met her eyes. Something moved through his face that was complicated and layered, and she watched it work its way toward the surface. "No," he said. "I am not telling you to leave." He looked back at the road. "I am telling you that this is about to become something other than a paperwork problem." "It was never just a paperwork problem," Ada said. "It was never just your problem either." She paused. "Nora lost her land." "Those families the firm stole from in St. Louis lost their land. Whoever else Voss has worked through in this county lost their land. This is bigger than your ranch, and it's bigger than my letter of recommendation from a firm that doesn't exist anymore." She held his gaze. "I am not going anywhere." Elias looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon light was angling low across the yard, the kind of light that makes everything look more significant than it might otherwise. "You said you answered 14 advertisements," he said. "Yes." "And you came with all of this, knowing what kind of country this is, knowing what kind of men operate in it." "I came with what I had," Ada said, for the 3rd time. But this time the words carried something different, because he had asked the question differently, and they both knew it. He turned to face her fully. "Why?" he said. Not about the advertisements this time. Something more direct than that. Ada took a moment. She had been asked this question in her own mind for 4 days, had turned it over the way you turn over evidence, looking for the clean explanation, the one that held up to examination. She had not quite found it. "Because I was tired of being right about things in rooms where no one would listen," she said finally. "And because your letter said you were a man who kept his word. And because—" She stopped. Then, "Because I have been useful in the wrong places for a very long time, and I wanted to be useful in a place that deserved it." Elias was quiet.
That's not a romantic answer, she said. No, he said. It's an honest one. He looked at her with something open in his expression. Something she had not seen there before. Something that had not had a name yet, but was taking shape. I spent 6 years after my father died running this ranch alone. I got good at alone. I got so good at it that I stopped being able to imagine anything else. He paused. I wrote that advertisement because Dill's wife Ruth told me I was going to die alone in that stable, and she was not going to forgive me for it. Something shifted in his face. She was right. Ada said nothing. She understood that some things a person says out loud for the first time need a moment of air around them before anyone else touches them. I didn't expect, he started. No, Ada said. Neither did I. They stood there on the porch in the late afternoon light, not touching, not needing to. The space between them charged with the specific electricity of two people who have been through something together that has changed the geometry of how they stand relative to each other. Then Clara's voice came from inside the house, brisk and practical. Kane, I need your signature on 3 places before I go. They went back inside. Clara left with Dill and the documents at 5 o'clock, riding south with the document case across her back, and a set expression that Ada found profoundly reassuring. She had trusted Clara Marsh's competence from the first moment the woman had sat down at the kitchen table and started reading. Competence, in Ada's experience, was the most reliable thing in the world. More reliable than promises, more reliable than declarations, more reliable than almost anything except the physical evidence of a person doing the work. She watched them ride out until the road curve took them from view. The evening was quiet in the way that evenings are quiet when the day has been large and the body knows it. Ada checked the horses one more time before dark. All 6 standing now, eating, the water buckets going down at a normal rate. She stood in the stable aisle and listened to the sound of healthy animals at their feed, and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since St. Louis. Elias came to the stable door. He had 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without comment and leaned against the doorframe. They stood there while the stars came out, the Texas sky doing what the Texas sky does in August, opening up enormous and indifferent and full of more light than seems possible. When this is over, Elias said. Ada waited. When this is over, he said again, and the land is clear, and the horses are back to full work. He turned the cup in his hands. I would like to ask you something. You can ask me now, Ada said. Not yet, he said. Not while we're still in the middle of it. He looked at her. Some things should be asked in the right order. Ada considered this. It was, she thought, the kind of thing a man who kept his word would say. A man who believed that sequence mattered, that things done in the right order held together better than things done in haste. All right, she said. They drank their coffee. From the stable behind them, Pearl stamped once and blew out a long, comfortable breath, the specific sound of an animal that has decided the worst is behind it and has settled in for the ordinary business of being alive. Ada heard it and thought, yes, that is about right. It was close to midnight when the sound came, not the slow approach of a single rider. Multiple horses, moving fast, coming up the main road from town without any attempt at quiet. Elias was on his feet before Ada had processed what she was hearing, his hand at his holster, his face gone to that cold, deliberate stillness. He crossed to the window and looked out. Then he turned to Ada, and his expression was not afraid. It was something harder than afraid, something that had been waiting for this and was ready for it. 4 riders, he said, coming in fast. Ada stood up. She picked up the satchel from beside her chair, the one with the documents, the street, Lewis papers, Nora's deed transfer, Greer's telegraph, and held it against her chest. Where do we stand? she said. And Elias Kane looked at her, and what was on his face in that moment was the full answer to every question that had been building between them since she stepped off the train. Not declared, not offered with words, but present and steady and absolutely certain. "Together," he said. Then he opened the door. The 4 riders pulled up at the fence line and did not dismount. Elias stood in the doorway with his hand at his holster, and Ada stood 1 step behind him, with the satchel held against her chest. And for a moment, nothing moved except the horses shifting under their riders, and the dry August grass bending in the night wind. Then the man at the front of the group pushed his hat back, and Ada recognized him in the lamplight spilling from the house. Not Voss, one of the deputies from the Main Street confrontation 4 days ago, broad through the shoulders, with the particular expressionless quality of a man who does what he is paid to do and has stopped asking whether it is the right thing. "Kane," the deputy said, "Mr. Voss wants a word." "Mr. Voss knows where the road is," Elias said. "He can come himself." "He'd prefer you come to him." "I reckon he would." Elias did not move from the doorway. "It's midnight. Tell him to come at a reasonable hour with a legal purpose, or don't come at all." The deputy looked past Elias to Ada. His gaze moved to the satchel she was holding. Something passed through his face, not intelligence exactly, but the animal awareness of a man who has been told what to look for and has just seen it. "Mr. Voss is concerned about certain documents he believes may be on this property," the deputy said. "Documents that belong to him." "Nothing on this property belongs to Harlan Voss," Elias said. "Not yet. Not ever, if I have anything to say about it." Ada stepped forward until she was beside Elias in the doorway. She looked at the deputy and kept her voice level and clear, the voice she had used in the conference rooms of Hartwell and Cross when she needed men twice her age to hear her as an authority rather than an inconvenience. "My name is Ada Merritt Kane," she said. "The documents in this satchel are copies of public records obtained legally through proper channels, supplemented by documents created in my own hand that constitute my personal property under law. Any attempt to take them from this property without a lawfully issued court order will be documented and reported to the Federal Land Office of the state of Texas." She paused. "The Federal Land Office that was contacted by telegraph 3 days ago and responded with authorization of review, which I am happy to show you in writing." The deputy stared at her. One of the riders behind him shifted in his saddle. Another had gone very still. "Mr. Voss is not going to like this," the deputy said. "Mr. Voss's feelings about it are not a legal instrument," Ada said. The deputy sat on his horse for a long moment, the kind of moment where a man is calculating the distance between what he was sent to do and what he is actually willing to do. Then he pulled his reins and turned his horse without another word, and the 4 of them rode back down the road toward town the way they had come, faster than they had arrived. Elias waited until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then he let out a breath through his nose and turned to Ada. "Federal Land Office," he said. "Greer authorized review. That is a federal proceeding. I did not say anything that was untrue." "You said it like a judge." "I said it like a woman who has been in enough rooms to know that the way you say a thing matters as much as the thing itself." Ada looked at the road. "He'll tell Voss tonight. Voss will know about Greer by morning. Then we're out of time." "Clara filed in Bexar County this morning," Ada said. "She sent word back with Dill, who is sleeping in the bunkhouse, because I told him to stay in case we needed him tonight. The injunction filing is on record. Voss can know everything he wants to know. The question now is whether the court acts before his 30-day deadline." Elias looked at her. "How confident are you?" Ada met his gaze. "In the documentation? Entirely. In the court system moving at the required speed? She paused. That is a different question. He held the door open for her, and they went back inside. She did not sleep. She did not try. She sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low and went through the documents one more time. Not because she expected to find something new, but because doing the work was the only thing that reliably moved her through the waiting. Her mother had taught her that. Keep your hands moving, and your mind will follow. Still hands make room for the worst kind of thinking. She heard Elias's boots on the floor of the back room long after midnight, heard him stop walking, then heard the quiet creak of him settling onto the cot, rather than continuing to the kitchen, which meant he was at least lying down, if not sleeping, and she decided that was sufficient. She was still at the table when the first gray light came through the kitchen window. Elias came in at dawn, took one look at her, and without a word, poured water into the basin, set it to heat on the stove, and put the coffee on. Ada watched him move around the kitchen with the ease of a man who had been doing this alone for 6 years. The specific efficiency of someone who has reduced all the morning rituals down to their necessary elements and nothing more. He set a cup in front of her and sat down across from her with his own. "You need to sleep," he said. "I will," she said, "when there's less to think about." He looked at her over his cup. The morning light was honest and plain, and she was aware that she looked like a woman who had been awake all night at a kitchen table, which she was. She had stopped caring what that looked like somewhere around 3 in the morning. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. "I'm thinking about the timeline," Ada said. "Voss's 30-day deadline runs out in 26 days. The federal review Greer authorized can suspend foreclosure proceedings at the federal level. But the mechanism for that suspension to be communicated to the county court takes time. Clara's injunction in Bexar County is faster, but injunctions can be challenged." She turned her cup in her hands. "What I keep coming back to is the paper composition, the physical documents. If Greer moves on the evidentiary examination quickly, and if the paper dating confirms the forgery, the county foreclosure becomes moot. Everything collapses under it." "But that takes time too." "Yes." She looked at him directly. "I want you to understand something. I believe this works. I believe the documentation is strong enough, the federal connection is real enough, the pattern is documented enough, that Voss does not walk away from this. But I cannot promise you fast. I can only promise you right." Elias was quiet for a moment. He set down his cup. "When I was 17, he said, my father sat me down and told me the 2 things that would decide how my life went. He said the first was whether I was willing to work harder than the problem, and the second was whether I could tell the difference between a situation that needed speed and a situation that needed patience." He looked at her. He said most men get that second one wrong their whole lives. Ada said nothing. "I spent 6 years running this ranch alone," he said. "Being patient, waiting for things to stabilize, waiting for the right year, the right season, the right situation." He paused. "I think I confused patience with waiting for someone else to fix it." "That's a very different thing," Ada said. "Yes." He looked at her steadily. "I know that now." The rider from Bexar County arrived before noon. He was a court officer, young and officious, with a leather dispatch bag across his chest and the slightly harassed expression of someone who had ridden hard on someone else's timeline. He asked for Elias Kane at the door, and Ada called him in from the stable, and he presented the document with the formality of his office. The temporary injunction had been granted. All foreclosure proceedings related to the Kane Ranch property were hereby suspended, pending review of the underlying promissory instrument by the Bexar County Appellate Court, in conjunction with the Federal Land Office review authorized by Recorder Aldous Greer of San Antonio. Elias read it twice. He folded it carefully and set it on the table. He looked at Ada. She looked back at him. "It's a stay," she said, "not a resolution. But it means Voss cannot move on the deadline. It means he has to go through the appellate process, which is outside Paris's jurisdiction. And it means every day he spends in that process, the federal review gets closer to completion." "It means we have time," Elias said. "We have time," Ada confirmed. What happened next moved both quickly and slowly in the way that legal proceedings do. Fast in the places where it counted, and maddening in the places where it didn't. Greer's federal review team arrived in Red Rock 12 days later. 2 men with document examination equipment and the specific quiet authority of the federal government when it has decided to pay attention to something. They set up in the county courthouse over Paris's visible objection and Peel's frantic unhelpfulness, both of which the federal examiners noted in their report with the detached precision of people who had seen this kind of local resistance before and had developed a comprehensive indifference to it. They examined the promissory note Voss had produced. They examined the deed transfer from Nora Bright's case. They examined the documents Ada had brought from St. Louis, the ones with Voss's name on a Hartwell and Cross client register. The paper composition examination took 3 days. The results took 1 afternoon to write up. The promissory note had been assembled from 2 documents. The signature page predated the body of the note by a minimum of 3 years, based on fiber oxidation and ink chemical composition. The signature itself was genuine. Elias Kane had signed something at some point. The federal examiners went back through every document in the county recorder's office and found, buried in an 1878 filing for a water rights acknowledgement that Voss's land agent had handled for a neighboring rancher, a blank page with Elias Kane's signature on it. A signature collected 4 years before the promissory note was dated, kept, and used. The same technique applied to Nora Bright's deed transfer. The same technique documented in the St. Louis materials. 3 cases, 1 method. 1 documented business relationship between Harlan Voss and the firm that had developed and deployed that method. Clara Marsh filed the criminal fraud complaint in federal court on a Thursday morning. Harlan Voss was taken into custody by federal officers on a Friday. Ada heard it from Nora, who had ridden over from her sister's house, where she had been staying since the evening the 4 riders had come to the ranch, and who arrived in the kitchen looking like a woman who had been holding her breath for 3 years and had just been given permission to stop. "They took him off the main street," Nora said, "in front of the feed store, in front of everyone." Her voice was completely steady. "Judge Paris resigned this morning. Peel hasn't come into work." Ada sat down at the kitchen table. Nora sat across from her. They did not say anything for a long moment. Then Nora said, "My land." Her voice had changed, lost the steadiness, become something rawer and older underneath. "Can I get it back?" "Clara is already filing the petition," Ada said. "With the fraud conviction established, all deed transfers executed through the fraudulent method are subject to reversal. The process will take time, but yes." She looked at Nora directly. "You can get it back." Nora pressed her lips together. She looked out the kitchen window at the yard and the stable and the paddock where the horses were moving in the morning light, all 6 of them, including Pearl, who had developed the habit of standing at the fence and watching the house with an attention that Dill claimed was because she had decided Ada was the most interesting thing on the property. "My husband built every fence post on that land himself," Nora said. "He used to say the land doesn't know who owns it on paper. The land knows who worked it." She blinked, once, and the blink carried 3 years in it. He was right. Ada reached across the table and put her hand over Nora's. Neither of them spoke. Elias came in from the stable and read the room in one glance, and went quietly to the stove and put more coffee on,
and did not ask questions, which was, Ada had come to understand, one of the things about him that she valued most.
The weeks that followed had the particular quality of aftermath. Not peaceful exactly, but purposeful in a way the previous weeks had been only in crisis. Clara returned twice to gather additional documentation for the federal case. Greer sent a letter of formal acknowledgement that Ada had framed in her mind as the closest thing to an apology a federal office is constitutionally capable of producing. The neighboring ranchers who had lost land to Voss through the same method began, one by one, to come forward. Their cases would take longer. Some of them would be complicated by transfers that had gone through too many hands to easily reverse. But the mechanism for justice had been set in motion. And mechanisms set in motion by the right people with the right documentation tend to keep moving. Dill's wife Ruth brought a pie to the house on the third Saturday after Voss's arrest. She set it on the kitchen table and looked at Ada with the expression of a woman delivering a verdict she had been deliberating for some time. "I told him 6 years ago he needed someone," Ruth said. "He's stubborn like a post that's been in the ground too long. Takes serious effort to move him." She looked at Ada with dark, steady eyes. "You moved him." "He moved himself," Ada said. Ruth considered this. "Maybe," she said. "But he needed somewhere to move toward." She left the pie and went back to her own house, which was the small building at the east end of the property that Elias had built for Dill and Ruth 15 years ago when Dill came to work the ranch, and Elias had told him he could bring his family if he had one. And Dill had said he didn't have one yet, but he was working on it. They had 4 children now. The oldest was 12 and had recently developed the habit of following Ada around the property when she went to check on the horses, asking questions about herbs and medicine and what different plants were for, with the focused attention of someone who has found a subject that fits the shape of their mind. Ada had started answering in full. It was an evening in late September when Elias finally asked the question he had told her to wait for. The horses were all back at full work. Pearl and Cody were on the haulage contracts again, the contracts that had not been lost because the injunction had come through before Elias missed a delivery, and because Dill had managed the remaining horses with a competence that made the gap barely visible. The roof of the stable had been repaired properly, not the patch and hope method of the past few years, but new timber and good shingles put in by a crew from town that Elias had hired the week after the foreclosure threat was lifted. The federal case against Voss was proceeding through channels that would take another year at minimum, and the specific pace of that proceeding had moved from Ada's active attention to her background concern, the way a problem that is being properly handled by the right people can finally move to a lower register. They were sitting on the porch. The sky was doing what the Texas sky does in September, burning orange and deep pink along the western edge where the sun had gone down, the color so vivid it looked like something that had been deliberately arranged. Elias had been quiet for a while in the way he was sometimes quiet, not empty but full, working toward something. "Ada," he said. She looked at him. He turned to face her, and the expression on his face was the one she had never quite been able to name, the one that had been building from the first morning she had sat at his kitchen table and spread the truth in front of him and waited to see what he would do with it. It was open in a way that she understood had cost him something. A man who had built walls as carefully as he built fence posts, dismantling them deliberately, post by post, because he had decided the thing on the other side was worth the exposure. "I want to ask you to stay," he said. "Not because of what you know or what you can do or what you brought with you. Not because of Voss or the horses or the ranch." He looked at her steadily. "Because this place makes more sense with you in it than it ever did without you. And I make more sense." He paused. "I make more sense." Ada was quiet for a moment. She looked at the paddock, where Pearl stood at the fence with her ears forward and her eyes on the two figures on the porch, as if the mare had been following this particular conversation for weeks and was waiting for its resolution. She thought about a woman on a train from St. Louis with a satchel of medicine and a boot full of documents and 14 unanswered letters, riding toward a country she didn't know to marry a man she hadn't met, with nothing but the skills her mother had put in her hands and the particular stubborn certainty that right things done in the right order eventually hold together. She thought about her mother's voice. The land always tells you what it needs, if you know how to listen. She had listened. She looked back at Elias Kane, this careful, proud, difficult, decent man who had spent 6 years being alone and had finally, at great cost to his defenses, decided to stop. And she said, "I'm already staying." He reached across the space between them and took her hand, and she let him. And his palm was rough and warm and entirely certain. The hand of a man who kept his word. Pearl stamped once at the fence and tossed her head and went back to her feed, satisfied. In the shed behind the kitchen, the jars of willow bark and peppermint and chamomile stood in their rows on cedar shelves built by a man who understood that the right tools needed the right place to work from. And the window Elias had cut into the east wall let in the last of the September light. And the small girl from Dill's house was sitting on the stool at the workbench, with her chin in her hands, reading from the leather-bound book with a cracked spine and the handwriting that slanted hard to the right. The words that had traveled from County Cork, across an ocean and across a continent, to this precise piece of ground. Because knowledge that is meant to last finds the hands it needs. In Red Rock, Texas, in the year 1883, a woman who had been told she was nothing arrived with everything that mattered and refused, with great precision and absolute patience, to let the wrong people win. That was the whole of it, and it was enough.